practice of other countries in the world? The answer is no. He said that in 1983. But then 5 years later, when it happened again, while Ronald Reagan was still president, the next time it happened in 1988, it was the U.S. military who did it. 1988 was the tail end of the Iran-Iraq war. You'll remember that the United States sided with Iraq, Saddam Hussein, in the Iran-Iraq war. And a U.S. Navy guided missile cruiser called the USS Vincennes was skirmishing with Iranian military speedboats in the Persian Gulf on July 3rd, 1988. And the crew of the Vincennes, in the middle of that mess with these Iranian boats, took notice of an aircraft. It was an Airbus A300 civilian passenger plane that was taking off from a nearby airport in Iran called Bandar Abbas. For whatever reason, the crew of that U.S. Navy ship looked at that civilian airliner, which is in the process of taking off, and decided instead that it must be an Iranian military F-14 fighter jet coming down at them. They got the size wrong, they got the speed wrong, they got the trajectory wrong, they got the type of aircraft wrong, almost by an order of magnitude. And that Navy ship shot that civilian airliner down, and 290 people on board died in the Persian Gulf.
Good morning. We are following developments in the Persian Gulf where there has been a major tragedy and perhaps a major mistake. It involves an Iran Airbus. That's a wide-body jumbo jet.
This was the precursor to the Lockerbie bomb.
From a town along the coast of Iran to Dubai in the Persian Gulf. It crashed into the Gulf. All 290 people on that plane are believed to have been killed. Now, the Iranian government, the military, is saying that the plane was shot down by missiles, that they came from U.S. forces in the Persian Gulf. The Defense Department in Washington has said so far it knows nothing about the plane being shot down by missiles. It cannot even confirm the plane was shot down.
Throughout the morning, military officials were certain that U.S. naval forces in the Persian Gulf had shot down an Iranian F-14 fighter jet. Now they're saying they're not so sure, leaving open the distinct possibility that a U.S. missile may have been responsible for the crash of that Iranian civilian Airbus.
Seeing this footage from the day is fascinating because those two clips were from the very initial reports, the first NBC special report as the news was first coming out of the Persian Gulf that day about that airliner going down. First, the Washington saying it knows nothing about the plane being shot down, not even confirming the plane was shot down. The Pentagon saying, we think we shot down an F-14. Oh, maybe we didn't shoot down an F-14. The first inkling that something about this story was not making sense and might be a big mistake. And by later in the day, that same day, looking at the reports, the reporting that day, just from NBC, as it evolved over the course of the day, by later in the day, it was clear that that airliner had not just crashed, that it had been shot down, and that it was the U.S. military that had shot it down.
It has been one of the Pentagon's worst nightmares, a shoot down of a civilian airliner. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral William Crow, announced the terrible accident.
We believe that the cruiser USS Vincennes, while actively engaged with threatening Iranian surface units and protecting itself from what was concluded to be a hostile aircraft, shot down an Iranian airliner over the Straits of Hormuz.
In a statement released by the White House, President Reagan expressed regret and said he was deeply saddened over what he called a terrible human tragedy.
When the Russians had shot down a civilian aircraft 5 years earlier, right, so that was 1988, when the Russians had shot down a civilian aircraft 5 years earlier in 1983, President Reagan addressed the nation and said, no other country does things like this. Then when the United States did it 5 years later, the Pentagon did backflips to explain how understandable this whole thing was. What was concluded to be a hostile aircraft? Well, it wasn't a hostile aircraft, it was a passenger jet. The commanding officer of the USS Vincennes, which shot down that civilian aircraft, the commanding officer of that ship was later awarded the Legion of Merit, one of the military's highest service awards, for his service commanding that ship during the time when it shot down that airliner. They even gave the Navy Commendation Medal specifically to the ship's anti-aircraft officer, who was the officer in charge of recognizing real threats from hostile aircraft and directing an appropriate response. So that officer led the team that looked at what turned out to be an Airbus passenger jet, and that team decided it was an F-14, and they shot it out of the sky, and even though they were terribly, terribly wrong, they gave him a medal for it. The history of the armed forces of various countries shooting down passenger jets mistakenly, I mean, obviously you hope it's always mistakenly, that history is terrible enough without considering the way those countries and those militaries have tended to respond when they've been confronted with the realization that they have done something so terrible. The way they respond is usually somewhere along a pretty horrific continuum between denial and celebration. In 2001, 3 weeks after 9/11, the armed forces of the nation of Ukraine